In this video, I'm going to show you how to create an underpainting using watercolor pencils and then using regular color pencils on top to really make your colors pop and to add some texture. I'm going to show you is how to use watercolor pencils to create an underpainting or ground for a color pencil drawing. So I do have a little sketch prepared already of a cheeseburger, and this is hot press watercolor paper, so it's really smooth. I have some watercolor pencils right here. Just picked a few colors that I thought would work well for this. But I do want to mention because watercolor pencils essentially will turn into watercolor, I've got a brush, cup of water over here to do that. You can actually just use watercolors to do this as well. So either or you can mix and match. It just depends what you want to do. Now, some people like to just paint one color and then do the color pencil on top, where some people like to be selective with their colors, and that's why the Prismacolor watercolor pencils, I'm using Prismacolor, you could use any kind, but that's why it's helpful to use the watercolor pencils in the first place. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just get started with some light layers. I'm going to set those over there so they don't roll on me. And you can use any colors you want. Sometimes it's fun to play up colors, layer colors. Don't feel like you have to be limited to what the reference has. Depending if you're using a reference, you can always change colors. And I did sketch with just an HB #2 pencil. And usually I'm scumbling or just swirling my pencil around in a circular motion. And what I'll do is I like to layer a few colors usually with the color pencils as I just look at the transition of the light to dark on the bun or wherever I'm actually shading. But again, you can play with color. I keep it pretty light at this stage. I did, for example, leave some little spots for the sesame seeds, but I can also go over those and always use white color pencil on top. Usually shows up pretty well with the watercolor underneath, or I could actually use a white gel pen or white Posca pen. There's some options there too. But usually this layer I keep pretty light. Again, just swirling my pencil around. Get a little bit of this darker color back in and just create a little bit of that first layer. And what this will do is really make the color pencil pop. I usually do one layer with the watercolor pencil, but you could certainly blend it with water, which I'll show you in a few minutes here, and then let that dry. Do a second layer if you want to. I will mention too, my pencil lines, I could erase those a little bit more if I wanted to make sure they're hidden. It just depends on the style you want to go for. Some folks like things really realistic, so they don't want outlines. Other folks like things to have a little bit of, maybe some expressive marks or a little bit of stylization. That's often referred to. Just a matter of personal preference. So just usually I keep a couple pencils in my hand as I'm working. I'll just hop back and forth as I'm applying these layers. I just loosely look at the reference picture and just note where is it light, where is it dark, where might I want to create a little bit of contrast or color shift or layer colors. Again, I don't worry if they're perfect. I had mentioned this already too, but it can be really fun to just play with different pops of colors here. The color pencil really layers nicely on top of this, so sometimes it's fun to just let a little brighter color poke through and not worry about being super realistic. And different colors can create different moods, different feelings as an underpainting. And you can certainly grab a little test sheet and try some samples on the side too. That can be really helpful. I just continue along the way. Again, I'm not worrying about too much detail with this layer. It's pretty simplified. Now, like with traditional watercolor, you can leave whites, or with the idea of color pencil, because we're using this as a ground, you can certainly layer white on top. As I mentioned previously, white gel pens tend to work really well. A lot of folks like that. Other folks like to do some pasta pen or gouache, or there's some different options depending on what you have, but just keeping it pretty light here. I'm going to pause just for a minute to show you how I blend it, and then I'll actually speed up the video as I finish this portion. Usually I like a rounder flat brush. This is a watercolor brush. This is just a synthetic craft paint brush. It's a square flat shape. So what I typically do is just dip that in water, blot on, blot on some paper towel. I don't like it soaking wet, like it damp. You can play around with that too. It's another reason why some scrap paper is helpful. And usually I don't go crazy, go everywhere, but I mimic the strokes I use to apply the color in the first place. And then I just keep dipping in water. I like to blot on paper towel again, but experiment. It's okay to have a little water to push around. It just depends on the paper you're using too. See, I'm using some really heavyweight 100-pound cotton paper right now. So this can definitely withstand lots of water. But, again, different papers will react differently. So test yours out and see how that's reacting. But paper towel is always good to have on hand for blotting excess water. As you change color, clean your brush off a little bit too. Just because if I'm using some kind of browns, yellows up here for the bun, as I move down to the tomato, that might mix okay, but maybe I don't want to get that in the green because, whatever reason. So just kind of think of that. Some colors can mix, some colors you might not want to. I don't worry too much about the different values just yet because I'll be able to layer the color pencil on top and create more of that at this stage. Going everywhere with that. At this stage, I just worry about getting that first layer, and then I can define everything as I go. So that's just an example. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up, wrap this process up, and then we'll slow it back down and talk about the application of color pencil. So when your watercolor pencils have dried, you are ready to add the regular color pencil on top. So you can start anywhere you want. And again, you can mess around with colors, have fun, experiment. I usually just grab several that I think I might want to use. I definitely do a lot of layering when it comes to color pencils. I do look at the reference picture just to, again, see where it's light, where it's dark. And I can let some of this poke through. But usually what I'll start doing, do a lot of scumbling, which is swirling my color pencil around in a circular motion, just like I was doing initially with a watercolor pencil. But you can see already I start to layer that color on top and just starts to build the saturation And then I'll just kind of show you too as I start to work my way across. I can start to add in a little bit of color variation. Now, they do make blenders for color pencils as well. This is a colorless blender, which you can gently use to swirl the colors together. And if it will pick up some of the color. I usually just either eventually will sharpen it or use scratch paper and just kind of put that on some scratch paper to remove it. But like I noticed there is a lighter strip through here, so I might leave a little bit of the watercolor pencil poke through. And then I notice that it's a little bit darker underneath. That's kind of what I'll start doing now, just going around, layering color, adding color, can blend as needed, and definitely just keep building, keep layering as much as you want. Sometimes I'll hop back and forth those colors on the lower bun as well. You can move about it any way that you want to. And there's no wrong order, just different approaches. And with pressure, I like to start fairly gentle with color pencil and then gradually increase that pressure if needed. Color pencil, you can really layer it and mix colors. But if you do heavy pressure immediately, that's often referred to as burnishing. It just really pushes the fibers of the paper down. And it's hard to accept more color on top of that. It often has kind of a smooth, sort of shiny, waxy finish layer on top. So eventually I will start to get toward that, but I build that up slowly personally. But feel free to explore it any way you want. There's, a lot of fun ways to use color pencil. I just personally really like to take advantage of the fact that they can be layered and they can mix, and I can just gradually increase that saturation. Like right now, this, is looking close to the cheese, but then when I get in some of the variation with the cheese, that will start to pop. So all these different sections will just start to slowly work together. And then I can get those sesame seeds and kind of pop those out. But when you really look close at the sesame seeds on the bun, they're not pure white anyway. So actually this color underneath can work really well. Maybe I just want to add a little shading to them. And again, you do not have to follow your picture reference exactly. It's simply a starting off point. It gives you ideas of where things are lighter, where things are darker. Even if your colors aren't exact, it can still be helpful just to see where some of those shifts are. And then, so the bun at the bottom, I noticed that the texture kind of looks like it's pulling down. We have some directional kind of marks I might make, or tapping my pencil, stippling to get some of the dotted type of texture. So a lot of times when I'm doing color pencil is I just think about, well, and actually this is true for any material I'm using, charcoal, graphite, even painting, but I just try to think, how could I interpret that texture? So obviously this is not a real cheeseburger, and I don't even need mine to look super realistic. It's fun to have it be expressive and stylized too, but I think, what texture could help push this idea of a cheeseburger? How might I move my pencil? And so sometimes it's making vertical lines or horizontal lines or tapping, like the little shadow kind of along the bottom of the bun, just kind of pulling my pencil down and kind of creating these little loose vertical lines and just kind of leaving them, again, letting my hand shake a little and going back over. It's not perfect. There's all these little subtle variations. So that's really what I'm working towards now, is just pushing those, looking where it's light, where it's dark, those value shifts, various color shifts, like up through here. I notice, oh, it's a little darker. So maybe I want to swirl. This is a sienna brown. Maybe I'll swirl some of that in and kind of mix the color, and then just look around where else is there some areas that are a bit darker. And again, there's no rush on this. You don't have to go through this really quickly. This is just kind of a, little demonstration to show you the process, but you can slow down and take your time with it. The slower you go, the more details you tend to notice and can capture. And if you go a little bit quicker, you tend to maybe get something a little bit more expressive or stylized, which is great too. Just different ways to do things. I'm noticing in this area where there's some shadow, and even under some of the little sesame seeds, if you look close, there's some little shadows under there. So eventually I can kind of maybe take the tip of my pencil a little bit more and kind of go around some of these little sesame seeds and just darken to start pulling out some of those little shadows there. And then, even though each area, different colors and slightly different textures, you're essentially repeating a lot of the same idea throughout it, where you're just building up layers, layering the colors too, mixing the colors. And with that idea, it doesn't have to be exact. And remember, you can always test colors on separate paper too. So what I'll go ahead and do is we'll speed this up and kind of wrap up this cheeseburger and take a look at how that color pencil can really make things pop. So here is the cheeseburger with the Prismacolor. Now I could definitely spend some more time. I could definitely try to make these sesame seeds pop a little bit more. I do see a few little pencil lines here and there, which I could solve from, starting with erasing my pencil lines a little bit more before diving in. But, that's totally fine. I think still get the idea across of how to go about this. And then with a background, just to show you, I've just grabbed watercolor here, and I have a round paintbrush. Just going to do a nice little blue wash just to kind of show you if you want to add in a little watercolor or splash of color for a background, you can easily just work around your color pencil. Now you could certainly do a color pencil background, or, I could even do watercolor and then pop a little bit of color pencil detail on top of this, however I want to approach it. And of course, I didn't tape off my border or anything, so I'll just kind of loosely go around. But sometimes just getting a little pop of color in there for a background can make it feel a little bit more complete. I don't have to do like anything super detailed, or can leave the edges a little loose if I want to. Sometimes while this is wet, if you are using straight watercolor, which you could always use watercolor pencils as well, but while this is wet underneath the cheeseburger, I can just grab a second blue here and just kind of give like a little variation to the ground versus the top there, and just let that dry. So here is our finished cheeseburger. Again, could definitely add some more if I wanted to, but I think that's a nice little cheeseburger for a quick tutorial on how to use watercolor pencils as an underpainting for colored pencils.